next portion of our program. We have 3 generations of tobacco control professionals from civil society, academia, and youth voices who have joined us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And as we've mentioned in the beginning and mentioned in the remarks as well by many of the speakers, this WHO FCTC wouldn't be possible without the participation of civil society as well. So we must come and hear your voices, of course, as well. I would like to introduce the first speaker, if possible, Laurent Huber. It's a pleasure to have you. He is the Executive Director of Action on Smoking and Health, a US-based non-governmental organization fully devoted to supporting global health and international tobacco control efforts for over a decade. Laurent also served as the first executive director of the Framework Convention Alliance, the FCA, a global alliance of NGOs recognized for its vital role around the FCTC process. Mr. Huber, it's a pleasure to have you with us. You were closely involved in the processes of the WHO FCTC. My first question really would be, what was that experience like for you? Could you tell us more about it?
Well, it was definitely one of the most gratifying experiences in my career to engage as civil society and support the treaty process. I must admit, at the very beginning, we went into this with some trepidation. I remember a meeting we had with the NGOs, with civil society, between INB1 and INB2. And it was in a room like this. There were maybe not as many, but maybe 50 or 100 of us, maybe 50. And there was a bit of almost depression in the room. Some people thought, oh, the tobacco industry is going to kill us through this treaty, and we will not be able to have influence over the treaty. And one of our colleagues, I remember, raised his hand and he said, we have the expertise, we're the experts on this, because civil society, we represented NGOs, academia, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really ended up what ended up happening. I mean, civil society ended up having a really critical role. As you may remember, in 2000, already Kofi Annan was mentioning the important need for civil society to participate even in the FCTC process. And I had expected that basically what was going to happen was going to be a little bit like what we see with other multilateral negotiations, particularly those that deal with consumer products or corporate interests, where the industries could overtake the process. But this has really not been the case. One of the great outcomes that came from the FCTC was a very strong, vibrant civil society movement. And that had an amazing amount of depth and breadth and depth of expertise. We were able to get all sorts of expertise from epidemiological, legal, economists. We had really all sorts of expertise to help support the treaty. And one thing that I think was quite amazing, specifically in the context of tobacco control, is I think civil society helped galvanize and get to consensus among the scientific community, media, academia, on what needed to be done to address tobacco. And I think that had a big influence with a number of the things that then civil society did. As some of you may remember, we had briefing papers, 6 WHO languages to support the positions that governments were negotiating. We had the bulletin on a daily basis, and you will remember the dirty ashtrays and the orchids that did have an influence. Countries did seem to matter in some cases what positions they were taking. And even in supporting the number of signings and ratifications. So, for example, probably not a lot of you know that, but when the deadline for signing was coming up in 2004, some of our colleagues from civil society went literally door to door at the permanent missions at the UN, and we got 23 signatures before the deadline for signatures. So those are little details of the role that civil society played. Then we had also, with the support of WHO, we ran ratification campaigns in the 6 WHO regions, which I think really helped then also in accelerating and getting civil society at country level engaged in accelerating the ratification process. And I think probably might be one of the reasons why the FCTC entered into force almost in record time. And there's other areas also, even not only in the treaty negotiation, but even in the development of the SDGs, for example. Some of you may remember we're very lucky to have Target 3A in the SDGs. And that was very much thanks to the work of Caleb Otto, who was an ambassador from Palau, but who relied very much on civil society and the support from civil society to advocate for the inclusion of Target 3A. And I think Doug will remember some of that also. But what I was really amazed is by the ability from civil society and experts from all over the world to really be able to put their egos aside and to speak with one voice to support the treaty. And this, in today's world, there's a big need for a multilateral approach. And when you see some governments wanting to move away from that, I think what we've had with the FCTC is really a good model of when the UN system does work very well to find global solutions to problems. And involving civil society in the process, which is recognized in the treaty itself, in Article 4.7 of the treaty, but also in this context, also recognizing the need to put the industry that's causing the problem, keep them at arm's length with the introduction of Article 5.3. And I think all of those are really, to some extent, best practices and models that could be used also for other treaties being negotiated, like treaties to end plastic pollution, for example, or others. I think there's a lot that can be learned from the FCTC. And really, it's a treaty that can help achieve not only health objectives, but developmental objectives, as well as human rights objectives. I was very pleased by the by Mr. Dimitri's statements and by the support from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, given the human rights implications of tobacco, of the tobacco epidemic. So again, I mean, I was really impressed by what I was able to see civil society do through the treaty negotiations, not only then support the ratification process and then entry into force, but then also support the implementation at country level. And I'm extremely proud of having been able to work with all the governments in developing really a strong evidence-based treaty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huber, for highlighting the importance of civil society, not just that, but storytelling, right? This WHO FCTC has been described as a masterclass in international law. Before I'm looking at Dr. Betcher there, he described it as a masterclass once, and these stories highlight that fact very, very well. Thank you again.